The Titanic, a story of ice, fire, and conspiracy. It was April 10th, 1912, and the RMS Titanic, the crown jewel of the White Star Line, set sail from Southampton, England, on its maiden voyage to New York City. The ship was a marvel of modern engineering, hailed as unsinkable by its builders and the press. Among its passengers were some of the wealthiest and most influential people in the world, including Benjamin Guggenheim, Isidor Straus, and John Jacob Astor IV. But one name was conspicuously absent: J.P. Morgan, the banking titan who owned the White Star Line. He had booked a first-class suite but cancelled at the last minute, citing illness. Was it mere coincidence, or was something far more sinister at play? The Titanic had a nearly identical sister ship, the Olympic. A year earlier, the Olympic had collided with the Royal Navy cruiser HMS Hawke, sustaining severe damage. The repairs were costly, and the ship was declared uninsurable. Some researchers believe that J.P. Morgan and the White Star Line devised a daring plan: switch the Olympic with the Titanic, deliberately sink the damaged ship, and collect a massive insurance payout. The Titanic, they argue, was never the Titanic at all. It was the Olympic in disguise. The plan was audacious: rename the Olympic as the Titanic, send it out to sea, and stage a maritime accident. The iceberg collision would serve as the perfect cover. But there was more to this scheme than just insurance fraud. Morgan had a grander vision: the creation of the Federal Reserve, a central banking system that would consolidate his control over the U.S. financial system. Three of his biggest opponents, Guggenheim, Strauss, and Astor, were aboard the Titanic. Their deaths would remove significant obstacles to his plans. On the night of April 14th, 1912, the Titanic struck an iceberg in the North Atlantic. The ship's hull was torn open, and water began flooding the lower compartments. But was it just the iceberg that doomed the ship? When the wreck was discovered in 1985, researchers found something unusual. The metal plating on the hull was bent outward, suggesting an explosion from within. Some claim that a fire had been burning in the ship's coal bunker for days before the voyage, weakening the structure. If true, the Titanic was already a ticking time bomb before it ever hit the iceberg. As the ship sank, chaos ensued. Lifeboats were launched, but there were not enough for all the passengers. The wealthy and powerful, including Guggenheim, Strauss, and Astor, perished alongside hundreds of others. Meanwhile, J.P. Morgan was safe in his New York mansion, far from the icy waters of the Atlantic. When the survivors arrived in England, they were taken to a warehouse and held for 24 hours. Officials allegedly warned them never to speak about what they had seen. No thorough investigation was conducted, and no one was held accountable. The US and British governments quickly closed the case, and the narrative of a tragic accident was cemented in history. But questions remained. Why did J.P. Morgan cancel his trip at the last minute? Why were three of his biggest rivals on board? And why were there so many discrepancies in the ship's construction, sinking, and insurance claims? The following year, in 1913, Morgan successfully established the Federal Reserve, securing his place as the most powerful banker in history. The theory of the Olympic switch and the deliberate sinking of the Titanic is controversial, and many historians dismiss it as a conspiracy theory, yet the evidence is compelling. The bent hull plating, the pre-existing fire, the suspicious absence of J.P. Morgan, and the deaths of his rivals all point to a darker truth. Was the Titanic disaster a tragic accident, or was it one of the greatest financial schemes in history? Today, the Titanic remains a symbol of human ambition and hubris. Its story has been told and retold in books, films, and documentaries. But beneath the surface lies a mystery that may never be fully solved. Was the Titanic truly an unsinkable ship brought down by nature? Or was it a pawn in a game of power and greed? The truth may lie somewhere in the depths of the Atlantic, waiting to be uncovered.